Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo. We're here today to talk a little bit about the soundtrack of No Man's Sky. This is something that I think a lot of people are completely unaware of in terms of how they actually plan on implementing the soundtrack into this game or how it's being built specifically for No Man's Sky. They're using something called generative music. So before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the people involved in the making of the soundtrack for No Man's Sky. So you have 65 Days of Static, musicians, as they call themselves, noisemakers. Beautiful noise is still beautiful noise, though, and I strongly recommend you check out 65 Days of Static if you haven't already. All of the trailers that you've seen for No Man's Sky will have music from them that was either originally written by them or written specifically for No Man's Sky. So songs like Debutante and Supermoon, which was specifically written for No Man's Sky. The way that relationship actually happened, I thought was pretty interesting. So Sean Murray, the team at Hello Games, they've been fans of 65 Days of Static for a very long time. So they figured, you know, we're making this space game. Why don't we shoot them a message and see if they want to let us use Debutante in one of our... in one of our trailers for No Man's Sky. You know, we don't even know what the game's called yet. They send them this message. They show them this very early build of the game that has no name. And they end up having this back and forth conversation, which basically results in 65 Days of Static saying, hey, how about we do the soundtrack for your game? You know, we're looking for soundtrack work. We have great experience with, you know, this type of genre in terms of film. Like, this would be awesome. And boom, this relationship is then born. So then in comes Paul Weir. Paul Weir is the audio director on No Man's Sky. He's helped Sean in the past with games like Joe Danger. And he also is huge into the concept of generative music. In fact, he actually helped make a generative soundtrack for Thief. Yeah, that's right. The new Thief that was released not too long ago. So he decides, you know, okay, let's do this combination for No Man's Sky. And Sean Murray completely on board with the idea of, you know, we went through all of this work and effort to make this procedural universe with procedural spaceships, procedural planets, and procedural creatures and flora and fauna. You know, it makes perfect sense that the music should also be generated in a similar fashion to create that ultra unique one-off experience, that hipster experience for each and every person who plays the game. So that's how this sort of design is born. Now, some of you may not know what generative music is. To be honest, I knew very little bit about it until I did some research, but the basis of what you need to know is that 65 Days of Static is going to compose music. They're going to work with Paul Weir. They're going to write music, you know, and then they're going to break it down to its smallest bits and pieces and generate it then so it never loops. So it is seemingly infinite. So it is always something different. Now, this doesn't mean that you will never hear a composed piece of music inside of No Man's Sky. They've made it very clear that they still want to have pieces of the soundtrack, you know, things like elements of Supermoon and other music that 65 Days of Static will write for those key moments. So, you know, maybe leveling up or, you know, exploring your first certain type of location or buying your first spaceship. You'll still have those key elements. Those will still exist, and they want those to feel special. You know, they're not completely denying the power of a composed piece of music. And that was something I was a little bit worried about when I heard about the idea of generative music. I was like, well, I like the idea of that, and there's a lot of positives, I think, that could come from a generative soundtrack. We'll talk about those in a moment, but there is no denying, you know, the memories that we have all built with the games that we played in the past based on pre-composed pieces. You know, think back to some of your all-time favorite video game experiences, and if those games had amazing soundtracks, chances are you remember those. You know, the Halo theme and Legend of Zelda and Mass Effect. Like, you know, I can just go on and on with the games that I played growing up and that I played even recently that have had amazing standout soundtracks and how those have affected my memory of the game from an emotional perspective. So that still exists. But then you really look at what generative music can do in such a large space. The thing is, when I played Thief, it's like, okay, this is Thief, you know, it's a smaller environment, you've got more cut-up pieces of the game you're playing, it's more focused on stealth. The music, to me, never really clicked as being significant or special. I just don't think there were those same sorts of, like, memory checkpoints being made in my head while playing a game like Thief that there could potentially be inside of a game like No Man's Sky. You know, this is this massive universe, you know, exploration, I think is something that is fueled very well by music, you know, and that's something that I'm really interested in doing. So the idea that, you know, I might go to an ocean on a specific planet and experience the soundtrack that was generated right there for me, like my own personal composition. that was built just for me because I came to this specific point in this massive universe. And then you take the secondary idea, which is that there's a very high chance no one else will ever hear that piece of music that you just heard. It's just like you flying a spaceship that someone else will probably never fly, or finding a certain species, a certain alien race, or a certain creature that potentially no one else will ever find. It is a game about uniqueness in discovery, and the music is very much trying to add to that, be a part of that, and even fuel that. This is I really like the idea of the generative music in No Man's Sky, because to me, music can be this huge tool to manipulate elements of video games that we would otherwise find boring or dull. So right now, the majority of your experiences with games, especially games of the action nature, you look at Minecraft and things like that, games that are more open world sandboxy, but that are definitely have action elements into them. You remember those action moments. You remember, running away from a creeper or something like that. But the music in a game like that can make the downtime really important. And even though Minecraft didn't have a generative music system, I always felt that the music in that was so well designed for the downtime, for the moments when you were just building your house or just relaxing on, the deck of your latest, creation, overlooking this blocky world. It was really beautiful. So if No Man's Sky can do that in all of those moments of downtime that we will inevitably have with the generative music, that'll be really special. And I think that will definitely help emotionally fuel your journey inside of No Man's Sky. I'm a strong believer in the idea that games don't have to constantly give you something to do to create special moments. And I hope that No Man's Sky can be a really key example of that. That ability to say to the player, just because you're flying from point A to point B doesn't mean that this can't be memorable, that this can't feel fantastic. I think it's very hard to portray a true sense of discovery and exploration in video games. In the real world, you go to a country you've never been to and you look at a forest you've never seen, and usually you're awestruck. That's really fantastic. I think video games struggle to portray that. And I think that one of the tools they can use to make that more significant is definitely music and obviously audio design in general. So, very hopeful that No Man's Sky will be able to capture that experience, because to me that would be really special. And I think that will help, eliminate a lot of the areas of the game in which many of us would find ourselves being bored or dull, that have those specific moments be filled with interesting music is, interesting and unique, music that was generated right on the spot that only you are hearing at that point in time. That's wicked special, and I think that could definitely enhance those moments. Now, there's one last thing I want to talk about in regards to a big interview they did back in 2014. If you haven't seen it, I'll have it linked down in the description below. It's like 25 minutes. It's Paul Weir and Sean Murray, two of the guys from 65 Days of Static, talking about, all of their reasoning behind doing a generative soundtrack, how the relationship came about, and some of their thoughts on the way music is currently handled inside of video games. They make one specific mention that just made me respect Hello Games, Sean Murray, Paul Weir, 65 Days of Static, more than I already did. They talked a bit about video game trailer music and how right now the thing is, let's just make this trailer, we'll throw some dubstep, some Skrillex, some hip-hop in there. What's on the top 5 Billboard charts right now? Let's use that in our trailer. Let's ignore the incredible composition that existed in Halo 5 Guardians and just put Muse on the trailer, because everyone loves Muse right now, right? That's a real hip and popular thing. Who doesn't listen to Muse? They're one of the most popular bands, blah, blah, blah. They're so against that, and I love them for that. I always thought it was the highest level of disrespect and ignorance to hire these composers, these musicians, to create these wonderful pieces, these compositions for a game that the player is going to experience from beginning to end, and then to completely throw that out their window when they make a trailer. And just the publisher, was so involved in the marketing hype of, let's just use what's one of the most popular songs right now. Everybody loves dubstep. Everybody loves hip hop. Let's just throw that into our trailer. It does not at all represent what our game is about. It does not emotionally represent the experiences the player will have in our game, but it's popular, so let's market it that way. Makes me a little bit sick. So to see a game like No Man's Sky with so much excitement and yes, hype behind it, I don't even give a damn. They are one of the developers that I feel fully deserves this hype. And I hope so many people play the game and love it to death, because I want this game to be successful, because it completely ignores all of the regular conventions that AAA publishers and AAA developers have put in place for how to market and sell their experiences. It tears back all of the BS from those trailers, and they say, hey, this is No Man's Sky. This is the music of No Man's Sky. This is Debutante. This is Supermune. These are songs that you will hear in the game, written by the people who are also making the generative music. This is 65 Days of Static. They are a part of what makes No Man's Sky No Man's Sky. And that's what we show in our trailer. I love that. I respect that immensely. And I think many people will fall in line and agree with me on this. It's such a breath of air, because there was a point in time when that's what video games did. You know, video game trailers actually used music from the games. And that is the way that so many of our favorite franchises are remembered to this day. Final Fantasy and, you know, old Halo trailers, like going back, like they played music from the game, you know, and it got you in the mood. It got you excited, you know. You were stoked to play Halo 2 because the first trailer you saw was this wonderful trailer, you know, and the Halo music kicked into action and you were just like, let's do this. Like, yeah, you know, that was there. So to do that with an original piece of work, a brand new IP, is super awesome. If you guys haven't checked out 65 Days of Static, I really recommend you do. Go hit them up on Spotify, whatever music service you use. Listen to the music. Check out Supermune and Debutante. You will recognize it immediately from the trailer. And I think you'll already have that emotional connection without even having played No Man's Sky yet. I want to thank Fark S, one of the longtime subscribers and viewers of this channel, for pointing out the Game Informer interview to me back from 2014. He's definitely somebody who triggered this conversation and this discussion. It was something that I just kind of pushed to the side and really forgot the importance of. So really stoked that I was able to have this. Genuinely thanks to him. Thank you, dude. Let me know what you guys think about this. You know, how important is music in video games to you? I think we could sit here all day and talk about whether or not generative music could work, but really, how much does music mean to you inside of your video game experience? I think for most of us, we recognize how valuable it is and how big a part it plays in creating those memories and those emotional connections to the games that we play and experience. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.